Welcome back to the Transfers Podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles, and I'm joined this week by one of the sport's most accomplished journalists, football correspondent for the Sunday Times, author of books on Leicester City, the 2020 World Cup, Peter Schmeichel and Gareth Southgate, and co-presenter of a new BBC documentary on a club I promised not to mention, as they've recently been restored to the rightful place in the hierarchy of Scottish football, below Dundee United. Welcome back to the Transfers Podcast, Jonathan Northcroft.
I was enjoying that intro so much until the second half of it. Now I'm sort of weeping silently.
I won't explore it anymore because we did promise not to mention that club. I do look forward to listening to your podcast. Not available overseas at present because of rights issues, but I hear it is as excellent as expected.
It covers the bit until Aberdeen Football Club ceased to exist, which was round about 1986.
I got you to mention them yourself. It's excellent. I know. So the Premier League transfer winter window is open until February the 3rd, the Monday after a weekend of fixtures. And I can't think of a better guess to assess the landscape of what's been an unusually unpredictable Premier League season as its clubs consider their options in the market than Jonathan. But let's, as always, start with a news line. And I think this could concern the biggest transfer, potentially the biggest transfer of the winter window, in that unusually we have a very expensive player initially signed for 80 million euros in the summer of 2023 with 5 million euros of bonus, who's been told by his club that he can find himself a new place to play after falling out of favour with his coach. That's Kolo Muani, the France striker at Paris Saint-Germain, who Luis Enrique, although asking for him when he joined the club in 2023, decided very quickly he didn't like him as the centre forward in his team, sort of edging him out during the second half of his first season at the club. And then this season, barely using him at all, Kolo Muani started just 2 Ligue 1 games and made a total of 14 League and Champions League appearances in which he scored twice. He's at a good age. He's still 26, just turned 26 last month. He is in a position where the work is being done by his agent. What I'm told is his agent's been given an open door to offer him to any club to see if they can find a deal, which Paris Saint-Germain would prefer to be a purchase. They want money as quickly as possible in order to buy a replacement player who they've already identified. There has been, according to the agent, interest from Manchester United, strong interest from Tottenham Hotspur, Aston Villa and Juventus, with the expectation that he might be able to bring other clubs into that discussion. What I'm told from the Paris Saint-Germain end is that they are as yet to have direct conversations with any of those clubs. But they understand that it's going to be difficult to get a direct sale in this window. The general feeling about the market is that there are very few clubs with cash to spend, especially in this dimension of transfer immediately. And therefore, if PSG can't get a sale, they will look for a loan with an obligation to buy in the first place. And if that is unachievable, then look at the potential of a loan swap deal, which you would think might make Manchester United more of a potential candidate, in that Manchester United have Marcus Rashford, who Paris Saint-Germain looked quite aggressively at signing a couple of seasons ago. But again, although Rashford is for sale and is being offered around by his agents around the top European clubs, with interest from Milan and Borussia Dortmund so far on the loan, I'm told that PSG are not keen on Rashford now, partly because Luis Enrique doesn't like him as a player and doesn't think he will fit into his system, and because they think they can get a cheaper replacement and a more suitable replacement for their squad elsewhere. Jonathan, what do you think of this situation with Kolo Muani being offered around European clubs, and also Marcus Rashford? I mean, two guys who not that long ago were considered two of the top striking talents in world football, and both of them are basically being told, find yourself someone else to play. You don't fit where you are at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of the story, I guess, is it's the difference between a player being 23, 24 and that player then being 26 and entering the second half of their 20s. And what I mean by that is those are two players who were on that curve where you could look at them as being potentials for real top level, best in world type forwards, and have both had difficult couple of years, and it shows you how quickly football can change. Because as you noted, Duncan, if this had been mooted 2 years ago, I think United would have been snapping hands off to get Kolo Muani, and I think PSG would have been snapping United's hands off to get Marcus Rashford. And now it's a game where you're looking at two strikers with talent, or two forwards with talent, because we're never quite sure Rashford really wants to play, and that's part of the issue with him. But there are big question marks about them. Rashford, his overall direction and his poor last 2 years, what that means, whether he can be brought back to levels. And Kolo Muani, I guess, whether he's having succeeded at kind of second tier club, as it were.
In Eintracht Frankfurt.
Yeah. Whether he really is at that level, and Enrique's got doubts about whether he can play in a high level possession game and his positional abilities and all that kind of stuff. So that's the situation. But on loan, as loan propositions, I think once wages are sorted out, and that is a big if, but if deals can be done on wages, I think both are still very attractive. In Kolo Muani, that Tottenham are interested is very logical when you look at their issues at the top of the pitch, both of those clubs. I know that sounds weird with Tottenham, but actually, though Dominic Solanke's been a success, Son is on the wane at the moment, and they're not scoring enough goals from their insane sort of all-out attack to justify it, as it were. And then United, Rasmus Højlund just isn't delivering the numbers that a player of his cost and position has to. Now, still young, but not there yet. So I see this as one of it's a poker game, isn't it? Those clubs would want to keep the value of the players up while trying behind the scenes to get them out to make space on the wage bill and space culturally. And I suspect in both cases they might have to compromise. I think United will end up paying. I think Rashford will end up going out on loan, and I think United will end up paying a big chunk of the wages, and PSG might end up doing similar with Kolo Muani.
Yeah, obviously with Manchester United, they are now practiced in subsidising loans for high-profile players. They did it with Greenwood. They did it with Jadon Sancho last year to Dortmund, who are one of the clubs in discussion with them for Rashford. And
Alexis, didn't they? Which, going back a little further back, Alexis Sanchez.
Correct. So they've got themselves into. I guess they'll look at Jadon Sancho and say that one worked for us. He went to Dortmund. He played very well. We managed to offload him to Chelsea off the back of it. But look, on the Transfers podcast, we use Sky Sports estimated transfer values, and looking at the values of these two players is really interesting, because Kolo Muani, who, as you say, Manchester United, when they signed Rasmus Højlund, were going head-to-head with PSG for this player in 2023. His estimated transfer values dropped from 78.9 million in 2024 to just 23.7 million at present. And Rashford, despite being in the Premier League, despite being English, which you get lots of bonus points for in these algorithms, is down to 54.2 million, which I think they will struggle to get at present. I think they'd be, if they were offered 54.2 million by a club, I think they would jump at that at the end of this window.
I agree, and one of the difficulties they've got there is what happens when a coach kind of publicly excludes a player or questions whether they're fit. Even though Amorim, I think, his communications have been brilliant, really skillful since becoming United manager, but you can't hide the decision to exclude Marcus Rashford, and that depresses his value further.
Yeah, I think it's clear what Manchester United have. Look, let's talk about them generally, but it's clear that they have come to the conclusion that they have to make radical changes to the squad, and that involves selling players. It's something that should have been done in the summer. Something I think I know they were advised in the summer that Marcus Rashford was one of the key assets where they could make PSR profit for a homegrown player, and it was probably best to cash in on him at that point. And I think at that time there would have been more money available. But they are now looking at a scenario in which they have very little money to play with in PSR. They realise that they have to sell players and move wages off the book to give them some room to restructure. They've brought in a coach in Ruben Amorim who plays a totally different tactical system to the system they were using before. It's short-handed, particularly in the wing-back positions, wants another centre-forward, wants to upgrade midfield, has two of his centre-backs running out of contract and is obviously using a 3 centre-back system now. So they have lots of surgery to do there. But generally, what's your impression of where Manchester United are? They enter the second half of the season 13th in the league, 23 points off the top. Just 7 above the drop zone, with Amorim talking about the possibility of being drawn into the relegation fight. You have in the background Jim Ratcliffe, who now controls just under 29% of the club shares, having put another $100 million in last month, having hired 4 sporting directors in Dave Brailsford, Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox and Christopher Vivell, and then sacked the one who he described as a 10 out of 10 sporting director just 159 days into his formal appointment, and then allowing none of these sports directors to be the key figure in appointing the new coach, but handing that responsibility over to Omar Barada, his new chief executive, who of course has never been a chief executive before and has never been in the position to hire a coach before.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a difficult one, because I'd say that overall, United I think are in a worse position than they were a year ago when Jim Ratcliffe took over. And when you actually digest that, that's a pretty horrific position to be in, because there are windows in football, and you have to succeed and you have to make progress when a window opens. And a window opened for them when Ineos came in with new investment and a new voice in controlling the football operation. And that was a chance to reset and rebuild. And that has not been taken. The last year has been a wasted year in many, many ways. In fact, in terms of the squad profile, in terms of the building process, you could argue that they've made it worse with some of the summer additions, and perhaps even getting rid of some players that they might have been better at keeping, and now facing PSR problems, so not being able to make the same investment going forward, making big appointments. You only get limited opportunities to get those right. So it's pretty awful that this kind of new dawn that fans had waited for so many years has ended up a year on from it, making things worse. My hesitation in being completely gloomy is I do believe that they've got a much superior coach to the one they had a year ago, and not just this. I not just that, not as a superior coach, but also a superior figure to build around. Somebody that's as I said, got brilliant communication skills, charisma, vision, and cojones, I guess, if you want to put it that way, in terms of backing himself and making decisions. So Ruben Amorim is the shining light for them, I think, and the reason that there could be better days ahead. But they've got so much to sort out. As you say, they've got to now sell players or offload them on loan and do that in order to do a further rebuild. This after spending £200 million, another further £200 million on Erik ten Hag, more or less signings. And they're not all terrible, because I think Ugarte works well in Amorim's system. Perhaps not the player ultimately who's going to help you win the Champions League or Premier League, but for now makes sense. And Lenny Yoro was starting to show why he was the most sought after young defender in Europe a year ago. But having added De Ligt and Xerxes in particular just makes their problems worse. Then there's the deteriorating value of Marcus Rashford. Then there's the fact that they've, I think, made a big mistake offloading Scott McTominay. Just from many points of view, didn't raise much money from it. Great sort of culture bearer, just a daft piece of business. And rivals have done much better business than them yet again. So, it's Groundhog Day again. It's United hoping for better days ahead with some green shoots, but also lots and lots of worries.
It's interesting you mentioned Ugarte, because that actually was one of the signings that Ten Hag wasn't particularly keen on, and the new sports directors pushed through as they felt he was the best option for a combative, mobile midfielder. I think for me, one of the telling decisions they've made recently is to take up the extra year on Harry Maguire's contract.
Yeah.
With the brief being that it's because of his leadership qualities and because he's important in the dressing room. It would seem to me, if you're going for a ground zero rebuild, which I think they realise that's what they've had to do, and they've made this radical change of coach, and they've taken on someone who, as you say, has a very strong personality, very strong to the point of dogmatic ideas, is prepared to stick with this system even though it's not working, hasn't been working in the initial period, because he believes that the system will work when he's provided with the right personnel. In that context, not to clear the decks of what has been a problem player who's on a very expensive contract does seem strange.
Yeah, but then, as you noted, Duncan, the coach plays with three centre-backs. Mm-hmm. And when you look at United's collection of centre-backs, then I'd say that Harry Maguire is still maybe the second best to Lisandro Martinez, really. Albeit I'm a big Euro fan, and I think he will, in a year's time, be top of that tree. But that's a knock-on effect of signing De Ligt. You've got Victor Lindelof, who's looks like he's gonna leave it once his contract runs out. And
Johnny Evans.
You've got Johnny Evans, who is, for Johnny Evans 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but
15 years ago.
Johnny Evans is literally their best centre back, but he's also slower than me these days. But yeah, Harry's. I don't think I'm as negative about Harry Maguire as yourself. First of all, I have to say, I think Harry's got his qualities. I think he is a great character, and he's just he's better than Matthias de Ligt, so it makes sense to keep him. To be honest, and they might just need to try and offload de Ligt. But
De Ligt's kind of the younger version of Harry Maguire in terms of mobility and positioning.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say he's more a poor man's Harry Maguire than a younger version.
Let's move on to a more positive story in Liverpool and the what I like to refer to as the ball genius of Arne Slot. He has come into the club, established the best ever start for a Premier League manager, breaking Jose Mourinho's, I think, 20-year record, as you pointed out in your article for the Sunday Times this weekend. He's lost just one match as Liverpool coach, and he's about to face a self-destructing Tottenham Hotspur in the League Cup semi-final, first leg tonight. The commentator for Sunday's draw with Manchester United stated that the Dutchman had taken Liverpool to another level. Do you think that's true? Or should it be sufficient credit to say to him he's maintained Liverpool's level and changed their style of play while their competitors have declined in the Premier League?
Yeah, I think actually it's possibly you're closer than another level, but it's probably in between them. Look, they were at a high level under Jurgen Klopp, patently, very much patently. I do think they're slightly better this season, because I think he's made a couple of tactical adjustments that have really brought the best out of certain players. You know, Virgil van Dijk, for example, is now coming forward a lot and really starting the build-up, and sometimes starting the build-up in the opposition half. But at other times, he's able to save his old legs and kind of, you know, put his almost play with a pipe and slippers at times. So there's a really interesting way Slot plays, which is quite heavy on conserving energy. You know, as I put in my article, Liverpool are actually 20th out of 20 in terms of distance covered. Yeah. But they do play in incredibly dynamic bursts. And you've got someone like Van Dijk, who in that system is able to be a more creative centre-back. He's a wonderful footballer and come forward at times, play passes in the opposition half, but at other times gets to rest on the ball or rest while others have the ball. You've got, I think Salah's an interesting case in point where his workload is even less than it was against the ball, and that's a recognition of his age. But with the ball, Slot's tweak things a little bit so that he's got more space. The right side of attacking eight isn't as close. Trent hasn't pushed up as much. So that's why you see Salah in those, and Salah's staying a little bit wide. That's why you see him with so much grass around him, and he's so dangerous. So I think Slot's done a couple of things. The use of Ryan Gravenberch at a time when, in Rodri's absence, you realise how the dearth of top quality number sixes around. But he isn't. He has been turned into an absolutely top quality number six this year. So Ibrahima Konate and his improvement, I think there's a lot there to say this is an improved Liverpool team, but it's not another level, because, you know, this time a year ago, I think they were top of the league, or if not, they were bang in the title race. You know, really, really doing well, to people's surprise. But yeah, so I think it's a great compliment to Slot, how he's been able to do that. I can't think of another example in modern times where a great manager's left a club in England and the guy taking over has avoided it collapsing, let alone maintaining, just avoided it collapsing. So he's doing something incredible, and I have to say, Duncan, he might put you out of business, because this is a transfer podcast, but Arne Slot could become the first manager since 1971 to win a title without starting a single new player in his 11. He's on course for that. His only signing, Chiesa, hasn't started a Premier League game yet, and may not do so. So there you go. Maybe we don't need transfers.
It's a remarkable observation, and I think you're right. His ability to come in and be so successful, it's very difficult to think of a precedent. And you've got people talking about, it was an easy job. That's not how it was perceived when he was appointed. You mentioned Gravenberch. Liverpool tried to sign Martin Zubimendi in the summer for that position. Zubimendi refused to come to them, and then he ends up coaching Gravenberch into arguably the best number 6 in the division at the moment. Certainly the most impactful to his team. Has Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo playing in a way that they haven't played consistently for Liverpool before. It's been remarkable. I guess if we were talking about their transfer business, the thing to highlight here is outgoings and what's going to happen with two core performers and one player who's sometimes a core performer and sometimes a headache, as we saw at the weekend in his defensive work against Manchester United. So you have Trent Alexander-Arnold, who has a very big offer from Real Madrid, which Liverpool have countered with an improved salary, but while rejecting an offer of 20 million euros from Real Madrid to sign him in January. Salah, who is playing a fascinating game of going extremely public with updates on his contract situation, and I think flagging the fact that he would really like to stay at Liverpool, which I guess is a positive for them, in the sense that they don't. It's not just a case of convincing him it's the right place to be, as well as convincing on a financial perspective. And finally, Virgil van Dijk, who turns 34 in the summer and is also out of contract this summer. How do you see that position? It is actually very unusual to have 3 key players coming out of contract at the same time, albeit 2 of them in their 30s.
Yeah, and actually it demonstrates a failure in previous seasons by Liverpool towards the end of the Klopp regime to do the things that Liverpool for 15 years had been so good at doing, which is managing that profile of a squad and managing contract situations and all of that. And perhaps no coincidence that this happened while Michael Edwards was away from the club and in a period perhaps where the manager had become a bit more powerful and was taking on sort of sporting director position. So I'm not saying, by the way, look, and I'm a Klopp fan, I'm not saying he deliberately let these things happen, no. But you have sporting directors, so that while the coach is focused on trying to do the really difficult thing of winning matches and managing a squad day to day, that there's somebody sitting on top doing the strategic things, and there's been a failure to avert this situation. It's incredible that these 3 top players are coming out of contract at the same time. I think Liverpool haven't read the trend in football towards top players trying their very best to let their contracts run down. But that was there. I mean, Kylian Mbappe was doing it in front of everyone's eyes. You know, it's not. It shouldn't have been something that Liverpool couldn't see happening with these guys. As you say, they're now in different. Perhaps Van Dijk's not in as strong a position as the other 2, but I think Mo Salah's in a very strong position, justifying it with his performances, playing a brilliant PR game, and I think either gets an eye-watering salary from Liverpool or an eye-watering salary elsewhere. And Trent's clearly got a decision to make, but he's got himself to a position, as we know Real Madrid like to sign out of contract players. Yeah, that's part of the model, and he's got himself into that zone now. He's achieved that thing. So that's not to Liverpool's interest. I don't blame Richard Hughes for this, but I know a lot of Liverpool fans on Twitter, they're divided on Hughes. I actually think he's done a really good job. He helped bring in Arne Slot. Liverpool's outgoings continue to be really good. The sales they sell really well at good prices, and he is I think they quite sensibly didn't sign after not getting Zubimendi. I think that's a sign of holding your nerve, good strategy, and understanding. Sometimes when you don't get your top target, you might have somebody in your squad that is as good as anyone else that you could bring in, and it's just down to the coach to bring that out of them, and that's what's happened with Gravenberch. I think a lot good has happened since Edwards and Hughes came back. The problem is Liverpool are now paying for the negligence of the 18 months before that.
So if you were advising Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes, how do you resolve the three situations? Do you give Mo Salah whatever he wants? You assume Virgil van Dijk is the easier one because he doesn't seem to have a obvious candidate who can give him a better club and a better salary, the combination of both. And do you keep Alexander-Arnold, or do you say, well, actually, he's a bit of a defensive liability, and we've got a very good right back coming through?
My sense is that the starting point would be that they can't keep all three on or rather they couldn't keep Alexander-Arnold on the enhanced wages that he wants.
Yeah.
Plus keep Mo Salah on at the very least same wages, possibly enhanced wages that he wants, while doing the same with Van Dijk. So that option's off the table. I think there's a growing acceptance at the club that Trent is likely to want to leave, that his direction of travel is towards Madrid, and that nothing can stop that. And they have got Conor Bradley coming in behind him. So I think that decision is starting to be taken out of their hands. And the Michael Edwards dilemma comes down to, essentially, as you said, Van Dijk's an easier one, essentially what deal does he do with Mo Salah, if at all, to keep him? Because what I guess Edwards and Hughes have got to think about is Liverpool's position over the years of a sensible wage structure, and not being pushed by players into paying what they want, but for finding solutions that suit the club as well. Because once you're pushed around by one player, you're in the territory of the next one is going to try and do the same to you. So that's what they've got when it comes to Salah. That's the difficulty. But Salah holds a lot of aces here because he's so brilliant. He just keeps scoring goals and giving his, cheeky, smiling interviews, and he's so good. And I've been extolling Arne Slot, but he still take away Mo Salah from that team, and it's not it's not at the top of the league. So, I don't know the financials. I would if I was Edwards, I think Mo Salah's the exception. I think you have to do it. You just need to try and do it in some way that's on your terms, and whether that means some formula where he gets a loyalty bonus rather than the bigger wages that enables him to be paid without you breaking your wage structure. That's what sporting directors are paid for, or in his case, chief executives of football. But that's what I would do. What do you think, Duncan?
I was just going to say, smiling interviews. I think Mo Salah's given more interviews in the last 6 months than he has in the previous 6 years at Liverpool.
100%, yeah. I think we'd all stop trying to get interviews with him, and suddenly he's available.
I think the key analysis for Liverpool with Mo Salah is how long physically can he perform at the same level?
Yeah.
And how much of this season has been about his motivation, as he describes it, to give his best in his final season for Liverpool, or his motivation to earn that last contract. And I think, look, you mentioned Ian Graham's excellent book, How to Win the Premier League, in your article. I'd be fascinated to know if he has an algorithm, if he ever devised an algorithm that can give them a sense of that calculation.
Well, what strikes me actually is this is a territory that's like, I think the numbers are changing. I suspect the algorithm's changing, because what we're talking about, as you rightly say, is you need to try and project how long a player in their 30s can keep performing at a particular level. But we're seeing all the time that dial shift. We're seeing players like Lewandowski, like Cristiano, like Messi, pushing that further into the territory that 33. You know, if you'd said to Messi or Ronaldo, you know, well, you're done at 33, they would show you another 300 goals each, wouldn't they? You know, so and Lewandowski's scored an awful lot after that age. Now, Mo Salah's in remarkable shape, absolutely remarkable shape. Arne Slot's also, as I explored in my piece, got an incredible record for player availability, keeping players fit. He had it at Feyenoord, and he's proving it at Liverpool in terms of managing a squad, periodisation, and a style of play that allows him to rest in games. So there's an argument for saying that with him as manager, with Salah being one of those just rare and special players, champions really, that is going to push himself to keep going and keep going and keep going, that you could project another two years of high level output from him as a starting point. But you don't know. That's a problem. As I said, this is still slightly new territory. There's no definitive answer on this for them. So yeah, as you say, you need algorithms. You need the expertise, and what you don't need the other two situations at the same time, because that just adds to the headache.
Yeah, and the calculations, the financial calculations, as you say, it's probably impossible for them to keep all three. From a player who seems to be steadfastly avoiding any decline, let's talk about a club who have fallen into a really unexpected decline in Manchester City. We've had this 13-game period towards the start of the new year, in which Pep Guardiola's team lost 9 games, drew 3, and won just 1. Interestingly, over high-flying Nottingham Forest. They're currently 6th in the table, 12 points behind Liverpool, and I don't think anyone realistically expects them to come back this season. And you even have Guardiola talking about the possibility of not qualifying for next season's Champions League, and repeatedly questioning his own management. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that I think this is. I wouldn't say you could see it coming, right? Because otherwise, I wouldn't be a sort of simple sports journalist. I would be making a lot of money on betting markets and whatever. But the first half of last season, I think there were signs of decline in that Manchester City team, and I don't mind admitting I was foolish enough. I mean, God, I'm going to shoot my own credibility, absolutely shoot it to pieces now. But round about October, and I don't bet. I'm not even a gambler, but I don't even know why I'm doing this. You're going to laugh at me. Right, here goes. I put a bet on Spurs to win the league last year, right? Because they were really good price. Did I think they were going to win the league? No, but I thought they might. You know, they'd won their first 8 out of 10 under Ange. They were really good odds, and I just thought, I don't think City are going to win it this year because they're in decline. And of course, that was a ridiculous bet. But I wasn't fully wrong about City. That's the thing. They rallied a year ago, helped by Foden having the season of his life, and helped by De Bruyne coming back and having impact. And there's been a similar upturn since he came back. But his problem is he's not going to be able to sustain that, I don't believe. So I think they're paying the price now for what was there already, and that is allowing a squad to get too old, which is something they've never done before. And also, for the first time in recent history, a couple of transfer windows where they've sold better players than they've bought. You know, so to be specific about that, offloading Cole Palmer and bringing in Mateus Nunes. I mean, lots of decisions like that, offloading Julian Alvarez, allowing Liam Delap to go. It's been for a club that had been so good in terms of the market. It's been a spectacularly bad couple of years, and at the same time they've allowed a squad to get older. Players in clear decline like Kyle Walker. They bought an old player back with Ilkay Gundogan. Mateo Kovacic, another fine player that looks like he's slightly over the hill. Defenders, Stones isn't fit now. So there's been so much instability caused by that. A lack of intensity, which is important to their game, caused by ageing players and lack of continuity. For once, Guardiola allowed his little dance that he likes to do of letting his contract start to run out. For once, it hasn't helped them. I think in previous years, it's almost been a tool. He gets to November, he re-signs, it gives them a boost, they go on a big run. It didn't work this time, worked the opposite way. So as ever, a lot of reasons, but it usually does come down to players, and the biggest one is that squad has declined, and actually I think there were signs a year ago that it was going to happen.
I mean, two things that I think seem obvious on watching them play. One is the importance of Rodri.
Yeah, I should have mentioned Rodri, of course.
Well, you told us about putting a bet on Tottenham Hotspur to win the league, so we'll let you off with that one for entertainment value. So Rodri, who, interestingly, in the summer in the Transfers podcast, we identified that Real Madrid were looking to sign him in the coming summer window, so they were going to have a problem with Rodri anyway. But they're now missing that player who was so fundamental to breaking up opposition counterattacks and redistributing the ball ahead of the opposition play in their own half. And I think the other thing that's very noticeable to me is you see the counterattacks that are emerging from not having Rodri, and you frequently watch games where the opposition team have 4 players running at goal, and there are only 4 Manchester City players running back, which I think would never have happened before, and I think speaks not simply to ageing, but also to a lack of hunger and appetite, or a lack of belief that it's possible to win this season in the position they've got themselves into.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And actually, if there's a kind of comparison to this season and the crash, it's what happened to Liverpool in that weird season under Klopp when they really crashed. And I was told within the club that one of the problems they saw at Liverpool was when you've got players that are so used to winning and going for number one and nothing else will do, the minute they think we can't win this title, it's really hard for them psychologically. They're not it's not lazy. They don't sort of like jib it off. But that thing at the back of their minds is just like, well, it's number one or nothing. And if it's not going to be number one, I think you can see that with City. They're not motivated by playing for the second or third or whatever. In fact, it's taken them to get into a real crisis to then have a proper reaction, because then you're starting to your pride kicks in, and there's a baseline that you're certainly not going to fall beyond. So I do think that's a fair analysis. I do wonder if I don't think working under Pep Guardiola has ever been easy for a footballer. He's very demanding, very meticulous, very intense. And great when you're winning, maybe not so great when you're tired, you've been playing hundreds of games, and suddenly everything's on a downward spiral results wise. I mean, I've written about this recently that he also has a very prescriptive and restrictive nature for footballers, and Jack Grealish would be a case study where everything's about his positioning, his system, his rules, limiting players' touches, limiting the areas that they should be working with with the ball, prescribing what kind of passes they need to play into the box, all that kind of stuff. Because he's an incredible builder of machines. But for those individual players, I think it's hard. If you're Jack Grealish, it's hard. You've kind of had a bit of joy sucked out of you playing for him, and it's fine when you're winning, but when you're not, it's psychologically difficult. I think we've seen Jeremy Doku decline as a player because he's had a bit of that sort of spark taken out of him. So it's been fascinating to watch because we haven't seen a Guardiola team on a losing spiral before. I do think now, as I mentioned, that they've hit a bottom line. They're bouncing back up to something more like a performance level you'd expect. And it wouldn't surprise me if they end up in the top four this season. It really wouldn't. Because, of course, they're still good enough to do it. They've still got Erling Haaland at the top of the pitch. And talent in other positions. But they face a rebuild. And, of course, then you get into questions about the charges and PSR and their scope. I mean, I think right now that doesn't affect this transfer window, and we are going to see a fair bit of business from them because they can right now.
I think that's correct. I think they are one of the few clubs in the Premier League who have got substantial financial resource and capacity under PSR to buy. Yeah. And they obviously see that the rebuild has to start. The coach wants it, the club wants it, and I think they will. The briefing is they will try and do stuff now. They're not going to chase the wrong kind of player, and they prefer younger players. But they are, I think, of the major clubs, they're the one to pay most attention to in this window. And I think we should also just discuss the context of the Premier League tribunal in two ways. These 115 charges that became 130, because I think it has to have an impact on the players we're talking about, in the sense, for all that Manchester City are insistent that they will not be found guilty. They even placed a claim in their annual report that there was a comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence that exists in support of its position, which is quite a thing to put in a club's financial report to the money markets. Players must be asking themselves, am I going to be here next year? If what Pep Guardiola has said publicly, that the clubs want to see them relegated if they're found guilty, is correct, there is the potential that this is their final season there. And another thing which has been mentioned to me by a few people in the game, which is an interesting theory, is that that given that this tribunal is three independent judges who will, one, come to a verdict on whether they're guilty or not, and two, decide what the punishment is, that for City to have this kind of season while the judgment is being made, for them not to be seen as this indomitable force that has won 4 consecutive Premier Leagues, for them to be struggling in the table, might not be the worst of things for them, in the sense that those independent judges might say, oh, well, we don't need to punish them quite as hard as we would have if they were going to be running away to a 5th consecutive title on top of the Champions League table.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, it would be a hell of a conspiracy theory. I think it might be more accurate that it could be a happy accident. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know is the answer, because I think when it comes down to the judges, they've got to decide on facts of law. Surely they don't decide on, they don't look at a club's current state and decide. That's the sentencing part, isn't it? And even if you were to show some kind of leniency in the sentences, in the sentence, if they were found guilty, it would still have to be an enormous points deduction at the very least, just based on precedent. In terms of optics, I do know what that theory's saying. We don't know how much this affects the players. Players don't live in bubbles, so it will be in their consciousness, of course, what's been going on with the club. My point about them needing to spend in this window was partly because I think there will be a judgment between now and the summer window, and I think there'll also then be an appeal if it goes against City. So I'm not saying it'll be resolved by the summer, one way or the other, but there'll be a clearer outline. And let's say it goes against City, that will make it harder for them to recruit in the summer. So I do think they need to take advantage of this window now. And it's interesting to me that the first target they linked with is actually a striker and not a midfielder. We'd have expected another number 6 to come in, but it seems to be Omar Marmoush in the forward positions, which maybe just reflects Guardiola accepting to an extent that there's too much to fix against the ball right now, or that one signing can't compensate for not having Rodri. So actually, we're going to keep getting counter-attacked. We're going to keep being vulnerable. What we need to do is score lots of goals when we do have our possession and our dominance, and win games that way. That is my thought when I look at them being linked or pursuing forwards rather than midfielders. That he's just deciding that, well, it's just better to, attack's the best form of defence here.
I think they're looking everywhere. I think defence, they've been offered the Uzbekistan centre-back, Abdur Qadir Kusanov of Lens, who they want to sell for over 40 million. That would be an interesting one, because the guidance I have on him is he's not ready for a team of Manchester City's calibre yet. Centre midfield, Zubamendi is an option for them, and Ederson at Atalanta. I think there will be work done there. Let's move on to Arsenal, who you would have expected to have taken advantage of this decline in Manchester City, but at present it doesn't look like it's going to be a title season winning for them, or even a trophy winning season, having lost the first leg of the League Cup semi-final 2-0 at home to Newcastle, with Mikel Arteta blaming the different ball they use in League Cup ties to Premier League games. 6 points behind Liverpool, have a game in hand. Arteta went into this season in his strongest position of power ever at the club, having been handed a new 3-year contract in September. That contract, I'm told, one of the key reasons why Edu resigned his position as sporting director, to take up a broader position with Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos owner Evangelos Marinakis, the multi-club group, because he wasn't happy with Arteta's increasing authority at the club. Suffering a lot of injuries, have lost their best player, Bukayo Saka, not only to a hamstring tear, but requiring surgery on that hamstring tear, with Arteta saying he thinks it'll be more than 2 months. I think what we know is when players have surgery on hamstrings, it's a perilous situation. It's not something that clubs make as a first choice to try and fix those problems. Why do you think they've gone backwards this season?
Yeah, it's. I talked about windows, didn't I? And this was their window to achieve, and they've gone backwards, as you say. And that's a bleak position for them to be in many ways when you really digest it, because they now look like there's a lot of work to be done, and they themselves. I don't think have huge funds left to, they've already backed Arteta a lot, and yet they still look like they need a lot of reinforcing to really challenge for that title properly. They're still not doing it. I think one answer is a poor window. that Arteta, I think, has to take responsibility for, because as you say, he's become quite powerful and directing a lot of the decisions. And my cat could have told you that he needed to sign a striker, and instead he signed Mikel Merino, another midfielder, decent, serviceable player, but we haven't seen yet what new he brings to the mix that they don't already have. And they signed a very talented but also very injury-prone Italian defender in Calafiori. And I think what people have to understand with transfers sometimes is, they're not infinite. Every time a club makes a decision to sign in one position, they're deciding not to sign in another, quite often because of limited resources. So I think they've missed an opportunity to reinforce in the right way. I think you've seen Arteta become ever more cautious in his style of play after that first season when he properly had a winning team, and they fell away towards the end of the season, and lost out to Man City. And I remember games like the 3-3 against Southampton that cost them. And I think his conclusion after that was, we're too open, we're too vulnerable, we need to tighten up. But that tightening up process has led them to a point where it's been Saka and set pieces, to an extent. And Saka's now got an injury because he's been played a lot. And the set pieces have been really successful, but aren't going to win you every game. And then you've got a very sort of careful, studied style of play that is, I think, quite predictable.
Which has been studied very carefully.
Which has been studied very carefully. Yeah, I mean, look, I get watching them last night, and look, this. I sound like I'm not saying they're a bad football team. They're an extremely good football team, and they're an extremely well coached football team. He has coached the style really well, but is it a bit too limited? Is it a bit too predictable? Are there enough dynamic parts within the machine to make it a real top winning team? I don't think there are. There aren't enough goal dangers. Kai Havertz is not a number 9. He's a good false 9. I believe he could play as a false 9 all season if you want, but either side of him you have to have a couple of goal scorers, and they haven't had that. They've had Saka and they've had a misfiring Martinelli, and now they don't have Saka. And then in terms of creativity behind that, it's Odegaard and it's not much else. Fullbacks don't overlap anymore. I just think they're hard to play against, but they're hard to break down, but they're probably not hard to stop. So, and you don't win the Premier League on margins anymore. Gone are those days. I think the current era is you get 90 points, you score lots of goals, and that's what wins you the Premier League. And I just think they've become too limited in their approach.
My guidance on their transfer market is they have a degree of PSR flexibility, but ideally would need to make sales to make big signings, which is what they want to do with Arteta. Keen on Nico Williams again, who obviously turned down the opportunity to move to Barcelona in the summer, has a defined release clause, but that release clause would have to be paid. Just as close to 60 million euros would have to be paid in one go, unless they can convince his club to take instalments on it, which they're unlikely to do, particularly mid-season. And there is that focus on a striker, as there was last summer, where they tried for Benjamin Sesko unsuccessfully. Alexander-Isak liked, but good luck getting him for any kind of price, with Newcastle suggesting numbers north of 150 million at present. And Victor Gyökeres as a player who they've watched for a long period of time, who will be accessible in the summer. I think Sergio Cricinas in the last podcast mentioned that there's a gentleman's agreement that he'll be allowed to leave Sporting for 80 million in the summer, but they would likely not let him go in January without his higher release clause being activated. So it seems difficult for them to make one, to make the degree of difference that's going to bring them up to the level of Liverpool and beyond Liverpool in the second half of the season, and two, to do any of this major restructuring work in the January window as opposed to the summer window.
Yeah, you're right in saying they like Williams, who doesn't, but the fact you have to pay the full clause straight away is a problem to anyone, but would be a problem to Arsenal to just have to put down that amount of money straight away. I think is difficult. You're right to say that have they sold well? Well, they've certainly sold. If you look at the fact they've realised about 80 million by offloading Smith Rowe, Nketiah and Ramsdale, and got Vieira out on loan, plus allowing people like El Neni to leave. They did clear a bit of space, but I think they're going to have to continue doing that. It would be my understanding in that model, that unless Kroenkes are going to put in even more money, they'd have to, if they are going to keep pushing, if they did want to sign a Nico Williams, I think there'd have to be some sort of outgoings as well. Sesko's an interesting one because they were interested, but ultimately that's what I was talking about. Didn't push that hard in the end and put their money elsewhere on the assumption that Havertz can sort out our striking issues, and wouldn't it be nice to have another midfielder?
Let's cheer Arsenal fans up a bit by talking about the club that should have won the Premier League last season.
Oh God, look, that's why I don't bet. That's why, and I should never. And I haven't bet since, and I'm not going to ever bet again on football.
Tottenham Hotspur, 12th in the Premier League, having lost half of their 20 fixtures. They do have an opportunity to finally win silverware if they can find a way past Liverpool over two legs, which will be definitely the biggest achievement of Ange Postecoglou's time at the club if he manages to get through to that final. I think there's an argument that they are the least tactically flexible team the Premier League's ever seen. In the way that Postecoglou insists on having them playing, even when he has the majority of his defence out injured. It's great to watch as that wonderful statistic that's come up in recent weeks that no Premier League manager has been involved in with a higher goal per game average going into the net as well as being put into the net than Postecoglou. But it's so predictable, is it not? In this era of careful study of opponents and setting up ways to take advantage of how they play against you. I mean, is it possible to win that way with Tottenham Hotspur? Is it possible to win that way with Manchester City? Is it possible to be so doggedly fixed on playing one way and win, even if you have the best squad in the league and have it by a margin?
Well, as you say, it's entertaining to watch, right? I mean, and my missus, who's a big football fan, has got a fascination with goal difference. She always looks at goal difference in a league table, and she was saying to me just the other day, "Have you seen Spurs? What a bunch of jokers they are!" Because if you look at them, they've got a goal difference. Like you go down the bottom half of the table, and it's going upwards from Everton in 16th. It's -10, -7, -15, -5, +12. That's Tottenham Hotspur. They've scored more goals than anyone except for Liverpool.
Yeah,
I mean they're mental. And yet they've only got 3 more points than Crystal Palace. I mean it's and as you say, what's fascinating about them, it's not just, there's a lot of managers, and Amorim, we talked about, for example, are very fixed on a way of playing, on a system, and that's how they set out for every game. But even those guys, they usually within a game will react to a game situation or allow the team to flex a little bit depending on where the game is. And whether that's something as simple as, we're 2-0 ahead, we've got a lot of fixtures coming up, let's just manage the game, let's just rest a little bit like Slot would do. or we're under the cosh. Let's just rein it back just a little bit. We're not abandoning our principles. We're just flexing the approach. Postecoglou doesn't even do that. They play every minute of every game as if they're a goal behind in a cup tie and it's stoppage time. That's how they play at every point in the game. And we saw that against Brighton early in the season when at 2-0 ahead, they just flew out the traps again in the second half and were picked off and beaten. So it's fascinating. When it started, I thought, wow, this is my sort of confidence that it would go a bit better than it has was based on Ange's record elsewhere. He is a winning coach, or has been a winning coach everywhere until now. But when you actually then drill into it, I think that's been based on such high intensity and effort level. I think there's a similarity with Bielsa, actually, of just insane running forward and running back. And that has been successful everywhere else. But then you get to the Premier League, which is the most intense league in the world, the league with the highest physical output, the league with the quickest players, the most brutal teams in terms of who you face on the counter-attack, and it doesn't work at this high threshold. That's the overall conclusion I've come to on Spurs. In their defence, I don't think he was bequeathed. I don't think the club's been bequeathed a particularly great squad in terms of its age profile. If you might have noticed, they brought in a lot of young players: Bergvall, Archie Gray, Odegaard, all sort of basically teenagers, and that was because, if I'm not right and if I'm not wrong, they were looking at the squad profile and they had literally nobody that qualified as a homegrown player, I think, apart from like the third choice goalkeeper, more or less. So some weird things had happened in terms of the management of that squad. Not nobody, but not enough anyway. But he's also, I think players have been burnt out a little bit. You look at someone like Van de Ven, who keeps getting injured. Again, it's part of this high intensity style. Huge issue with Son getting older and starting to dip in his output. And a manager who what looked quite attractive at the start, this kind of difference and I do things my way is now starting to, or gone past the point of just looking foolishly stubborn. So the one thing is, I was at Spurs on Saturday. It remains incredible fun. There is still something very appealing about Ange in his, just his quirkiness. It's not dull at the stadium, and a lot of supporters are still enjoying it because this is Tottenham. This is Tottenham. This is kind of what they do. It's kind of what they've done for 50 years. In terms of the overall profile of results, and they're just doing it in a really interesting way. I think you'd have to be a Spurs fan to really answer whether all of this is better than winning stuff. I don't know.
That's just who we are, mate, as he likes to say. I mean, he has turned them into a caricature of themselves, as you
They've
mentioned.
got Uber Spurs.
But look, I was looking at their injuries yesterday, and I think this is telling. You've just mentioned it there, and it's clearly connected to the style of play. They have more players injured currently than any other Premier League club, and they have 6 with thigh injuries. 6 players with thigh injuries. 3 of them centre backs: Van de Ven, Romero, Ben Davies. The fullback who has to play as a central midfielder, Destiny Udogie, also hamstring injury. Richarlison and Odegaard, who's had surgery on his hamstring. And if you make your teams run incessantly and play a high line up into the opposition half for your defenders, it's really not a surprise you end up with lots of hamstring injuries.
No, and listen, I talked about Slot and his skill and the skill of those around him as physical performance guys in managing availability in players. that's part of, your great friend Rui Faria, master of periodization and managing workloads and stuff. This is part of coaching, and when you have a lot of muscle injuries, it's not a random fact. Something has gone wrong somewhere. I would add here that Spurs did lose a brilliant coach in the summer, Chris Davis, who's now manager of Birmingham, who I know quite well. Had worked many years with Brendan Rodgers, worked at Liverpool, worked at Celtic, worked at Leicester, and is now head coach himself. So that's been lost to the mix. It's not entirely the same coaching team, and Ange is a kind of slightly old-fashioned training ground operator in that he lets the coaches do a lot of it, and he stands Fergie style and takes the overview kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So there's probably that as well. But when you're 2-0 ahead and you've got issues over potential injuries, do you need to keep sprinting up and down? That would be my question. And Ange's take on it would be, if we dilute for 1 second who we are, then everything's lost. If I give the players the thought in their head that they can do anything other than all that attack, sprint up and down, then they'll take the easy route out in pressure situations. That would be his argument if he was here. You have to commit to it, and it has to be 100%. That's also the Bielsa argument. And as I noted earlier, has that approach ever won a top league? I don't think it has, and not the Premier League. I think it has to be a bit more. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. You've got to add those other elements of looking after the squad you have, calculating how many games you have in the season, making sure, especially if you're complaining, as he has done publicly, about the age balance and the experience balance of the squad, making sure you have your key players available for the majority of the season. Tottenham are in a good position financially. They can throw money at this market. In fact, they're one of just 2 clubs to have completed a transfer so far, having taken Czech under-21 goalkeeper Antonín Kinský from Slavia Prague for €12.5 million. The idea is that he will immediately go into the first team and compete with their first choice goalkeeper. Interestingly, he comes out in the Sky Sports estimated transfer value at €1.6 million. So either the algorithms got that one wrong, or they've paid a significant premium to take him in January. They're also been in talks with Paris Saint-Germain about taking Milan Skriniar, who's another notable player available in this window. PSG will let him go. They've allowed him to talk to other clubs. Not a favourite of Enrique's. They have interest in him from Serie A clubs, and they are basically going to wait and see who gives them the best offer by the end of the window. So that is an option for Tottenham, to get someone into their defence who's actually a centre-back in the centre of their defence. Little bit of extra news before we wrap up is on Dani Olmo, because Olmo has been linked with a number of Premier League clubs because of his bizarre situation, one that only Barcelona can generate, and having paid €60 million for the player in the summer, have not been able to register him for this second half of the season, despite various legal moves and despite selling forward VIP boxes as another of the many levers that they've tried to use to get themselves a team that can compete at the top of La Liga. I understand that Olmo has had conversations with a number of other European clubs, and so far is telling them that his strong preference is to stay at Barcelona, and he will not push for a move. Whether he will be able to hold to that position if Barcelona cannot get him registered, we will wait and see. Let's finish off with hero and villain. We'll do it for the first half of the season. I will choose the hero, Johnny, and I think I'm going to go for Nottingham Forest, a very easy choice, specifically the impact Nuno Espirito Santos had just a little over a year into a job which he entered desperately trying to keep them in the division. He's the only manager to put together 6 consecutive top-flight wins, currently third in the Premier League, same points total as Arsenal, an incredible 20-point improvement on the first half of the 23-24 season when Steve Cooper was in charge. They've already played Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City and Manchester United away. And they're the only team to beat Liverpool so far, who they meet again on Tuesday. Nuno, and I'm not sure we can believe him on this one, says he's only going to look at the table at the end of the season. Where do you think they'll be?
I think they might be top 4. I don't think they're going away. And it does remind me of the Leicester 2016 season in the sense that everybody kept saying, oh, well, it won't last. Look, they've got a very limited style of play. Yeah, they're having a good moment, but they'll get found out. And they never did. And I think more respect needs to be given to Nuno and Forest that we've seen enough now. This is not an accident. This is a really good, well put together team with 2 excellent centre backs, with a good central midfield, with a striker that's very competent, with pace and talent outside him, with a good number 10, and a manager who's got a record of delivering this football throughout his career, and did so pretty spectacularly at Wolves before on a similar club, but has probably got a even better team now. So I don't see Forest's overall performance level changing that much. I see them hitting, even if the points output declines, as I say, the performance output will probably stay similar. I think they're still on course for 70 odd. They'll still be on course for 70 odd points. They would only need another 30 points in the second half of the season, and that should get them in the top 4. And it's a good choice of hero.
Do you think there's a similarity to the Leicester team in the sense that Leicester side were not taken seriously by their opponents? People didn't adapt their style of play to what Leicester were doing until it was too late.
100%. That's exactly it. It only happened. Leicester only faced that spectre in the last 6 games of the season. You know, I wrote a book about them that year, and I followed them very closely. And it was only after the final international break that teams, and when teams, maybe the opponents at that final part of the season where teams are like fighting relegation or whatever, everyone's got something to play for. It was only then that sides started sitting in against them properly, and Leicester had to find out another way to win. And that's when the season got really difficult for them, those final games. And it does look like the same's happening with Forest. Like they're still not being given the respect of a top 4 team in the sense of how opponents are playing against them, and they would say, and that's probably part of why Nuno's sort of remaining so humble. Long may that continue from their point of view. Long may we pick you off on the counter attack. And it's one thing saying, "Oh, it's obvious how they're going to play," but it's not when a counter attacking team does it well, it's hard to stop it. As Leicester proved. By the way, I have to say at this point, I don't think this Forest team's quite as good as the Leicester team of 2016. But there's similarities. There's players that have been rejects from big clubs that have been given a second chance. There's really, really clever signings that other teams look at and go, why don't we do that? You know, like some Murillo and Milenkovic at the back.
Yeah.
As I said, the profile, good centre backs, good centre midfield, pace and talent up front. There are the similarities there.
And your villains of the season so far?
Well, we've mentioned it earlier on. I have to say, I think it's Ineos, because what I want to add to what we said earlier about how badly this year had gone in terms of the Manchester United rebuild. The reason I think the pick was villains is sacking 250 people at a time when you're spending £80 million on De Ligt and Xerxes. I mean, that's rotten. Putting ticket prices up to the point where Paul Scholes has been talking about this, that it's £66 a ticket. If you're a family from Manchester, from Salford, it might cost you 250, 300 quid to try and go to a football match. And Jim Ratcliffe, I want a new stadium, but I think the taxpayers should pay for it. Where do you live, Jim? Oh, I live in the tax haven of Monaco. I mean, I have to say there's not been a lot to like so far there. So I think Jim Ratcliffe is top of my list at the moment.
And you haven't even mentioned what he's done to Grangemouth outside football.
No, but Duncan, that's it. If you actually look at how Ineos operate, how he's operated, then there is a pattern. And look, a very successful man, and that might prove to be the case with Manchester United overall. But let's say willing to take some brutal financial decisions to get there. And
not, so far, it seems, all of the smartest decisions in his changes to the club, as we discussed earlier. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us in this first Transfers podcast of 2025. Always a delight to get your insight and analysis on football and those admissions about your gambling habits.
Yeah, I'm gonna ring my therapist now. I feel better, Duncan. I've unburdened myself. I can face the day again. I could admit my flaws. My God, imagine betting on Ange and Spurs.
You've been listening to the Transfers Podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, follow and rate us on your favourite platform. Your support helps build a bigger audience and bring you more news, analysis and insight. You can also follow and message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at TransfersPodcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Jonathan is at J Northcroft. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The Transfers, the Transfers, the Transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The Transfers, the Transfers, the Transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.